You're listening to the first episode of the 10th season of the 2-Month Review, a weekly podcast in which we take one giant, challenging book and break it down bit by bit, section by section, talk about it, analyze it, and have a good time. This season is all about Duck's Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann, the 1,020-page masterpiece that came out a couple weeks ago. Giant book. So I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books. I'm joined as always by Brian Wood.
Hi, Chad. Thank you for having me as a guest on season 10.
And today we have special guest Dan Wells, the publisher of Biblioasis, who's responsible for this particular edition of Duck's Newburyport. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Chad. Hey, Brian. Thanks very much for doing this, Chad. It's great.
Yeah, of course. I've been excited to read this book since you first brought it to Winter Institute, The Galleys, some time ago. But then I didn't read it then, and using this as an excuse. I'll give a bit of background on my relationship to the book, and then I have some questions for you, Dan. But
Sure.
So I was going to read The Galley because it was a giant galley. It had the great front on it that was written by Vanessa.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
That's works for Biblioasis, and it's like a long thing about like using the same tick that's throughout the book of like the fact that blank, and it's like the jacket copy is basically describing that. Then before I started reading it, you told me that she added 30,000 words.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So when this manuscript came in, we knew that it was going to go through editorial, and we didn't know what would happen. And really, to give credit, we were only tangentially part of the editorial work on this. This was primarily edited by Ali Millar at Galley-Beggar Press, who were the leading publishers on this book. And so when it was going through editorial, we assumed that it might become even slightly smaller. And we found out that it was considerably larger, 30,000 words. But they were all, as Ellie has said, very good words. Going back through the book again, and reading what she added, it just made the book richer. And far funnier, right?
How long is your book, Brian? 30,000 words?
Yeah, about, sometimes, NaNoWriMo shows up and you got some extra words to put into your book. Who knows? I'm glad we have the director's cut, basically. So we get all the goods. I'm all for it.
Exactly. So Dan, how did you decide to do this book? I mean, it's got to be a big risk.
It was. The backstory here is we've had a long-standing relationship with Galley-Beggar Press. We bought a couple books from them before. I think they're probably one of the smartest small publishers in the English-speaking world. And back in June or July of last year, Ali wrote to me and said, "I've just come across this amazing manuscript. Don't be scared. It's 800 pages. It's a single sentence, but it's absolutely brilliant." And she sent it to me. She didn't have North American rights. This was just her doing me a solid and letting me know something that had really excited her. And so we read it, both myself and John Metcalf, and we fell in love with it. Now, John, he is, I think, Canada's closest answer to maybe a Gordon Lish. He's been one of the best editors in the country for about 50 years. Wow. He's discovered a tremendous amount of great talent. And his response on finishing this book, and he read it in 2 or 3 days, was it's probably the best manuscript he'd received in 50 years.
Holy
so
shit.
Even based upon that, we knew that this was something we were going to have to go forward with. The problem was, and I don't know if this is getting into it too much, but the problem was that, we're a small, not entirely well-known, especially across the pond, Canadian press. And it
By the pond, I assume you mean Lake Ontario.
That's right. In England, anyway, Lucy's agent didn't know who we were. And they were, obviously, this is a very American book. We're hoping for an American publisher. And it took us about 6 months of sort of pursuing this book to convince them that we would be the right home for it. So that's a long, rambling, yet short version of how we came to publish this thing.
That's interesting. I didn't know that part of it. I assumed that for some reason I thought that Galley-Beggar would have had world rights and you guys did it jointly together. That's curious. The reason one thing to point out, and we'll get into more about the book in a second, but as part of the backstory, Brian was asking this right before we started too, that why we ended up doing this as the first non-translated book for this podcast, the first book written in English. It is very American, in contrast to like everything else that we've done. And it all kind of came out of our conversation at that jazz club where you're talking about how scared you were that if this book didn't sell well, it was going to be a big hit because it is so big, and like the printing cost has to be just astronomical. And for all of it to break even, it would have to sell a good number of copies. So I said, well, we'll do our little bit that we'll try. We'll do this 2-month review, so at least there's that. Meanwhile,
yeah, fair enough. No, I think at that jazz club, and yeah, I've had a fair number of sleepless nights over this. But at that jazz club, I think you told me, and I don't know, you're really good with statistics and numbers. It comes from baseball, I think. But you told me that I think I have to sell 27,000 copies to break even.
Yep.
And we're not there yet.
Right.
We're a lot closer than we anticipated. So no, I mean, this was you doing us a solid. We knew there's a line in this book where she's talking about her mother's book, and the grandfather had said this book will either be a success or a failure. Yep. And we knew that this was the risk with this, and certainly the costs of it were, when we actually looked at this book, and this is rather foolish to admit, but when we first looked at this book, we've never put a book in a spreadsheet in our lives as publishers. We don't respond to things that way. And since we felt so strongly about this book, we couldn't, even though we knew it was a big risk, we couldn't let the practicalities of publishing this determine whether or not we could do it. We had to just figure out a way to do it. So that's the spirit we went into this with. Mm-hmm. But when you actually begin to look at the numbers, they get pretty dire pretty quickly. And it's actually been a very difficult year to publish this, because in the last year, you've also had printers who have consolidated or gone out of business. There's been a lot more pressure on printers in North America, which has also made this far more difficult to publish than we had initially anticipated. So everything that's happened since it has turned this book into a little bit of a sensation has really helped save our bacon.
I'd say it's more than a little bit of a sensation. It seems like one of the benefits for us doing this here is that there are so many people talking about this book online right now and on Twitter that we might expand our audience in some ways to like the people who aren't reading difficult Norwegian books, but instead are like, no, I'm down for this 1,000-page piece. Yeah. Like, well, tune in, because this has been it's the finalist for the Man Booker Prize, which will be announced on the 14th, I believe, of October. So just a couple weeks from now, you'll find out if it won, which would be a huge boost. It's been reviewed everywhere. Like the New York Times Daily had a review of it, I believe, right?
They did. Parul Segal reviewed it and gave it a rave review. And then it was followed up a week later by another one. Yeah.
Which is incredible. Like getting a book reviewed twice in the New York Times is something that usually only happens to like the largest books, the largest presses. So that's pretty unusual. The quotes in here, though, the one that I have a question that, Brian, you ask it, because you brought it up.
Oh yeah, I can't help it. Now that I've got some stuff coming out, I'm very interested in blurbs and how they come about and whatnot. That whole rat race. But I like the one from Cosmo. Ulysses has nothing on this. It's like holy moly, that's quite a blurb there.
Yeah, well, that came through. That's a Cosmo UK, Cosmo US. That didn't really respond to us. But
to be fair, they did give 10 tips on giving a blowjob after that review in Cosmo. So there's
those 10 tips were from Joyce's letters to his wife.
Yeah.
Like Ulysses has nothing on this book, but Joyce sure does have a lot of things to say.
Some of the lead up on this has just been really fun to watch, because there's only a certain amount of attention that literary fiction gets. I'm just so happy to see that it's coming from a smaller press for once that's getting some love. So this is fantastic.
It is, and I mean, I think that I've been reading over the last year here and there Maxwell Perkins' letters, and there's a letter he wrote, I think it was to Hemingway Fitzgerald's someone anyway, where he basically said that a book that was published 6 months before or 6 months after, could succeed or fail in the way that it might not have, published at a different time.
Mhm.
And I mean, this book we've all published brilliant books that have not got the attention we feel they rightfully deserve. I mean, one of my, as my staff is probably tired of hearing, but one of my working definitions of publishing for a very long time has been the management of disappointment. And part of this is, part of the success of this book is this book speaks, I think, to this moment in time, especially in America, but I think elsewhere as well, in a way that few do. And there's a bunch of sort of social and political sort of factors which I think have made people very receptive to it in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been 5 years ago. So I think part of this, the book is, I think, one of the most brilliant things, if not the best thing we've ever done. When I was pitching this at Winter Institute, I said, when we are a footnote in American literature, it will be because we published this book.
Wow.
But
yeah, wow, that's solid.
But, that does not mean the success of it was predetermined either. And the other people, to speak of blurbs, we should probably highlight are just the independent booksellers who got behind it from the beginning. There's the Cosmos.
No,
blurb.
Those are my favorite, like when Pals and the booksellers actually, like they're the ones that have their boots on the ground and know the stuff. So I love their blurbs. Yeah.
And Dwight Garner on the New York Times podcast basically said, did anybody see this book coming? This is the book no one seemed to know about. And I beg to differ, because booksellers across the U.S. in particular have been about it for 9 months and have been talking about it and championing it for that whole period of time. And they're the base.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There's a clear bit of a divide between the New York centric publishing and the independent bookstore groundswell for indie press. But that's funny because this book has been on my radar since you guys mentioned it, since you first mentioned it. It feels like it has for everyone else. One thing, okay, so to start getting into it a little bit too with the details, had you read any of her other books prior to reading this? I
had not. I'd never read her before. I think I knew her name, but that is it. This was, so this is the first thing I read of her. And then I was so amazed. I went back, especially over Christmas, and read 4 or 5 other ones.
Oh, wow.
And you can see, she's incredibly inventive, incredibly playful. Yeah. But this is not stylistically the way most of her other novels are at all. This is quite a departure, not just in terms of size, but in terms of voice and style and everything else.
Interesting. The only thing I knew about her was that she was the daughter of Richard Ellmann, that wrote the great biography on James Joyce, which I read a few summers ago. And I knew that part, but I knew nothing else either. Brian, had you heard of her before?
No, this is my first exposure to it.
Okay, so I'm going to read you something, guys. Okay, this is her bio, not from your book, which is fun, but from the Baffler. Lucy Ellmann was born in Evanston, Illinois, but was dragged to England as a bitter and confused teenager. She always meant to return to the U.S., but somehow it never happened. Now preferring rain, cold, whiskey, trains, and free healthcare to cars, guns, religious fanaticism, and sunshine, she lives in Scotland. Her first literary achievement was a paranoid poem about a chicken. They say, this is funny, they say the hen can lay. I don't know, but they know. This constitutes its first publication. Then... Okay, so this is a bit long, but but it's worth it. She's also written 6 novels at the time that this was written. Sweet Desserts, which won the Guardian Fiction Prize, is about 2 sisters, not about desserts. Varying Degrees of Hopelessness is loosely based on a year Ellmann spent as an art history student at the Courtauld Institute in London. Man or Mango, A Lament, is a transatlantic love story with really very little to do with mangoes. Dot in the Universe follows a shallow woman through death to reincarnation as a possum and beyond. Doctors and Nurses is a happy tale of sadistic medical malpractice. Mimi is about a plastic surgeon who sees the light. And Ellmann wrote a short film, The Spy Who Caught a Cold, about a noisy child at a chilly British nudist camp. This is the part that I think you're going to love the most, Brian. After being a fancy-ass lecturer in creative writing for a few years, Ellmann came to the conclusion that teaching an art form in an academic environment can only destroy both teacher and student. She also considers writing groups and writing workshops both futile and inhumane. In opposition to such approaches, she and Todd McEwen, her husband, started the fiction Aitlier, I don't know how you say that word, never said it out loud, in 2011, an editorial service that offers fellow writers honest literary one-to-one feedback and support. Ellmann is committed to peacefully circumventing all governments in order to create a worldwide matriarchy in which women, art, and animals will be honored instead of bombs, steaks, cigars, man caves, computers, gangster movies, and garter belts. Boom!
That's excellent.
It's so good. I love the anti-creative writing stuff, which sort of shows up in here too, the academic things. But I especially also love like the strong anti-male, anti-government bit there at the end is very fantastic.
Yeah. Which I think is throughout much of her work. I mean, some of the themes I think are, there's certain things that she's talking about throughout a lot of her earlier work as well, like Dot in the Universe or Man or Mango. But the other thing that is really obvious from that biography is the sense of humor. Yeah, which I think is the other thing which works across all of her work.
That's very clear in this part too. So let's get into talking a little bit about the book, because I have a few observations. The part that we're talking about today is technically up to page 81. And I'm not sure this season, I don't think we're going to spend as much time pointing out the page numbers so much as talking about what's in them, because this is a very digressive book in a lot of ways. And I think it'll serve us better just to have conversations around it. But before we do that, how do you guys describe this? Like when you had to do your pitch to consortium and you're like one sentence elevator pitch, or like the really short descriptions that you give to the people at the beginning, what's your way of summing this book up so that we can give our audience some sort of idea of what this is going to entail?
All right. Well, I mean, since this is basically a 1,000-page sentence, your elevator pitch can be a little longer.
No, it's a long elevator ride.
I know. Consortium does not give us those, does not grant us that sort of thing. Buddy.
They don't. That said, I took up an inordinate amount of my 14 minutes with this one. But I mean, I think the shape of my pitch was this is not, people have talked about it as stream of consciousness. I've said it's more torrent of consciousness. It's a torrent of consciousness in the mind of an unnamed Ohio housewife as she bakes tarte tatin to pay for her cancer. And she worries about everything. So she worries about what DuPont has put into the water. She worries about how her daughter is addicted to morning routine videos. She worries about, why the man who delivers the chicken feed, always has a loaded rifle on the seat beside him, So it's, I think, very much a novel about being a woman, as much as I can make any statement about this, in America at this moment in time. And it's about paralysis. This woman is trapped, and she can find no solace anywhere. She's a historian by training who retreats back to history, and what does she find there but genocide, slavery, and incredible crimes and tragedy. So it's a book that grapples with America as it's developed and as it is.
I like that you brought up stream of consciousness or torrent of consciousness, because it made me think of the how apt that epigraph is at the beginning, where no country perhaps in the world is better watered with limpid streams and navigable rivers than the United States of America, and no people better deserve those advantages or are calculated to make a proper use of them than her industrious and adventurous citizens. I don't know. I wasn't sure how to take that at first when I started reading it. I started thinking about this kind of these torrents coming from her mind, and then kind of going back to, oh, good Lord, living in America right now is the perfect time to have all of these thoughts put down. Like how many streams there are now that can navigate all across the United States with how bonkers it's become. So yeah. I thought it was such a well done job, kind of framing that for us at the beginning with those quotes.
Yeah, I mean, the Thornton Wilder as well, right? Because you've got, I mean, right below it, I represent a field you're passing between Grover's Corners, Ohio, and Parkersburg, Ohio. In the field, there are 51 gophers, 206 field mice, 6 snakes, and millions of bugs, insects, ants, and spiders, all in their winter sleep. Yeah. And, I mean, I think that kind of detail and focus is also central to this.
Yeah, those two things, I think, frame wonderfully what kind of prepares you, what you're about to read and experience with this book.
What do you think about the proviso at the beginning that this is a work of pure supposition?
I didn't give that one. I thought, was that kind of like more of like a CYA kind of a thing with so many named, like actual factual named things?
I don't know. I mean, I don't actually. I've really only been thinking about that the last few days. As I sort of, vaguely prepared for this.
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder if it's a way of her highlighting. People have talked about this as an attempt to get at one woman's consciousness, and people have fought about whether or not people actually think this way. And I wonder if this is her way of sort of indicating that this is, this is an attempt. Yeah, it's sort of an attempt or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I just wondered what you, if anybody else had given much thought to what that proviso means.
I think I want to keep coming back to that as we go through the season. Now that you brought it up to me, and I'm gonna pay attention to that and kind of have that in my mind as we read it and see if I can maybe unpack something with it. But
okay.
Right now, I'm not sure.
Same thing. The thing that stood out to me at the beginning, well, there's one other line, is this mountain lion with her cubs bit that is in paragraphs, which is nice.
Yeah.
It has some periods so you can rest. This is a book that allows you not to be able to rest or anything, which is fine, which I love. But I know that the Ulysses comparison is going to come up a lot because of Joyce being one of the stream of consciousness sort of not inventors, but like one of the first people to really employ that technique and do it for a long period of time. And I think it's interesting that putting those two things in contrast, at the beginning of Bloom's section in Ulysses is where he's talking about frying up kidneys and how he loves kidney, and it has like the acrid taste of urine and all that kind of stuff. And then she's here making cinnamon rolls for her kids, which is a very different thing. Like, and I feel like it's subverting that sort of Ulysses or Joycean stream of consciousness idea and establishing it more both in terms of the things that she's talking about, the concerns that she has, from like a female perspective, but also I think that this style is a little different in terms of that stream of consciousness or torrent of consciousness than how Joyce would do it, how other people have done it in the past. Like there's something unique in the way that this is developing that I particularly like. And even in the first 81 pages, you can't quite see all of it, but I can feel it starting to evolve in a way.
Mm-hmm. You want a comment from me on that?
Give a comment. Yeah, I flipped to whoever needs to comment next so that I don't have to see my face on the screen.
All right. Well, I mean, in terms of the mountain lion, which we haven't talked about, I mean, I'm not going to make any comment about the Joycean stream of consciousness versus Ellmann stream of consciousness, in part because it's been too damn long since I've read Ulysses. But I mean, motherhood is absolutely central to this book, and that is one of, outside of the narrative, the way these two narratives come together towards the end of the novel. I mean, what you're seeing in the Mountain Lion section is another form of sort of more obvious, natural, primal motherhood. I mean, so I think that this is the preeminent preoccupation of this book.
Yeah, which is great for me. There's Anthony can attest to this for anyone who doubts, but there was a week or two ago where I went on this long bit about how much I just love moms. Like I think I just love moms. Like, period. That they're better people. They've done more. They have a better evolved consciousness because they've had children. They're like better. I just like moms. So being in this world of like a mom, I'm into it. I'm into it for that reason, which I don't want to sound creepy. It's not supposed to be sexual in any way. It's just really like dealing with people who are moms. They have had so much more responsibilities, and that comes up in here, like all the responsibilities, the taking care of things, the like way of managing stuff. It provides like a different view of the world, and one that's much more evolved and mature, I think, than most other people that are not that people who don't have kids don't count. I'm not saying that, but just, pro mom.
Just say something. Enough of the preambles and the apologetics.
I don't want to offend. Every season I offend someone. Like there's some group of people that'll be, and this time it'll be like all women under the age of 30 who have not had born children are going to be like, fuck that guy, fuck this podcast.
No, I think the little audio tag at the beginning will just be you saying, I really love moms. I'm really into moms. And that's it. Out of context.
Please no.
Can I do that? I'll do that. I really
Great.
love
I mean, a lot of Lucy's, the interviews and essays around this book that have sort of been published over the last few months, I mean, really talk about this. And one of these sort of uncomfortable strands, I mean, even in this first section of this book is the narrator's relationship to her children, but especially to her daughter, Stace, who, doesn't show, at least on the surface, a tremendous amount of respect for her mother. And this sort of disrespect of motherhood, I think, is again something she is very much trying to discuss in this novel.
Well, even that first line, I mean, like that the beginning part was very just poetic in the way it sounds, the timing of it, the richness of the language compared to kind of the more, I don't know, when it goes into the single sentence. But with the first line, talking about possibly wanting to eat your young, like in that, you know what I mean? There's so much angst and what a tightly coiled line with a lot of tension in it. When you're all sinew, struggle and solitude, you're young, being soft, plump, and vulnerable may remind you of prey. That is, I can see why, like, okay, we're in for something good. That's a unbelievably good first line. Holy cow. Amazing.
This is one of maybe our third or fourth book in this series that involves someone eating their children or talking about the possibility of eating their children. There was Physics of Sorrow had that all over the place, but related to the being a mom and the Stacy bit and their treatment. 43, the top of 43 for the American edition. I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but I believe the British edition is 4 pages ahead.
Yeah.
So it would be 47 in the British one for anyone listening or following along. But top of 43 in the American one is where she's talking about Stacy and saying, like, the fact that she really seems to watch my every move, waiting for me to do something she can get me for, or maybe just so she can feel even more disgusted with me. The fact that she makes me so nervous, the fact that she's got me so spooked and frazzled, I'm scared of all young women now, because when I look at them, I see another potential mother hater. The fact that I always wonder how they treat their own moms, the fact that I avoid young women whenever possible, the fact that they frighten me, they do, which I think is interesting related to what you're saying about their relationship and how it's impacted her mind.
She speaks to that as well on page 11 with the ego and how smart kids are and how sure they are of themselves. And when our narrator grew up, how, like, you don't brag, you're not proud of anything. You, like, keep quiet, keep your mouth shut. Like, there's this divide between the way our narrator was raised and how her kid is. And yeah, you see it again there.
That part on page 11 too is where was the most, like, good place moment for me, because in the last season of Good Place they figure out that, like, everyone's going to the bad place because there's so many unintended consequences that even if you try and do everything right, there's all this thing that are going wrong that you're responsible for because of your one decision without knowing it. And that's right here too. Like, the fact that maybe we should get an electric car or a hybrid. The fact that electric cars are worse, though, Leo says, because they're coal-fired originally instead of using gas. The fact that computers somehow use up all the energy in the world. The fact that nothing you do seems innocent anymore. The fact that even baking a pie has many ramifications. Yeah. I love that kind of part of this, the undertone of, like, what the philosophy of this book is going to be.
No, I mean, that when it comes to sort of favorite sentences, that's one of the ones I highlighted.
Nice.
The fact that there can be ramifications to baking an apple pie, which he does throughout this whole book, and this is an exploration, I think, in some ways, of the unintended consequences of a lot of small actions,
which is great. Which I really like. I love so for this lecture, she's doing all that. I don't know if there's, like, a way to, as this goes along, to even like summarize the plot, because it is just, like, her thoughts and things that she's going through. But the things that we learn about her in this section are that she has cancer, her mother has died, we used to teach at a college, taught, like, I guess, like, American history, but, like, Native American history, and I believe, maybe I'm wrong about that, but at this weird college that doesn't exist but sounds almost like Peoria. And she left there, broke her wrist, hates that school, which I love the part where she hates that school quite a bit, is struggling with like getting stuff together and with her kids, and then ends up being at the end very angry about the world. That's my quick summary. That count?
Seems to fit. Yeah.
Sure.
This is going to be one of those seasons where it's like, here's more or less like the bits that go through, but there is some sort of movement in like and like her mind or how these things come up. Like you get it at the beginning and it is all there, but like as things start to repeat or move on, there does seem to be something more about like the idea of like how she's seeing the whole world that gives you a compelling reason to keep reading. And then it's not the voice is like the main thing, obviously, and like pulls you along, and it's funny and it's observant and it's sharp, but there is something too about like that sort of hook that's going to bring the reader through 1,000 pages.
Well, I mean, I think that the book and some of the comments that I've heard from readers. One of the most recent one, there's this novelist Claire Cameron in Canada who talked about the fact that she is entirely in control of the narrative. I found this incredibly propulsive. I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but I mean, I find it very difficult to stop reading. You know, when people hear that the whole sentence, the whole novel is linked on the fact that statement, that, you know, I mean, which we haven't talked about it at all. And at first, you know, it seems like there's no way that this sort of continual repetition is going to work. And yet I find it actually does give you a little bit of space to take a breath. And it gives you a rhythm, and it also sort of propels you immediately into the next thing. I mean, that's what kept me going initially. How did you guys feel about that?
For me, it read very fast, because sometimes when you get a little bit tired of reading, you kind of look for a break or like this is an off ramp for an exit. Like there's no exit here, and you're like, once you read one, like the rhythm starts going, you can read the next, and it just kind of keeps building and maintaining this momentum, and like the fact that it just kind of works. It's almost like the train going across like another railroad tie. Like I just had no problem breezing through the parts I read.
So it's funny you say that, because I was going to say it's very similar to Zone by Matthias Enard, which is also one sentence with like a couple interspersed chapters that have like where the character is reading a book, so it has normal punctuation within like those sections. But it has he's on a train the entire time going from Turin to Rome, and it's the one sentence, and it's got that same clicking thing. So it reminded me mostly of that. But with here, the difference being that in Enard's book, from what I can remember, it's been some years now, but there's no tick that breaks it up, and there's no there's a rhythm to it, but there's not like the fact that like that part. It doesn't have a repeating phrase like that. But also the parts in here where she goes off on like the little wordplay puns or things that sound similar or go back and forth. That I feel like is a pause in a way. It's like almost a reset for how you're reading it. I don't remember Zone having any technique like that. I just remember it being like a straight like go. But it's also about like incredible violence in Europe, and you know, it's not a funny book. So maybe it doesn't need that. This is much funnier. Like even
about incredible violence in America.
Yeah, incredible violence in America. I mean, but absolutely. Maybe all violence books should be one sentence. The part I have to read this part because I love this this part where it says about the school, and it's talking about the school. Then it was all came from one guy, Alfred Piolia, who'd probably flip in his grave if he knew what they'd done with it. Like the amount they spent on signage, for instance, the fact that you can't see the buildings at Piolia because sometimes for all the signs telling you where they are, like the chemistry laboratories, law school, Alfred's pantry, swimming pool, virtual library, but there sure weren't any signs warning about tree roots, like beware Wurzelweg or something. The fact that it's pretty amazing they got Paul Violi to do a reading, Catalog of the New Wonderment. The fact that for once they had an event that wasn't an alumni fundraiser. The fact that Peoria College stinks, both as an employer and as an educational institution. Alfred quote away from the Ivy League, the fact that the Ivy League it ain't, the fact that the students don't seem to notice how lousy it is, or most don't anyway, the fact that they're too busy with their fraternities and sororities and loans and tailgate parties and switching their majors, switching yards, and hydrous ammonia, the fact that the football team stinks too, the possums, otherwise known as the possum pussies, body hair taboos, the fact that Leo can't cook noodles, blah, 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 blah. Like, I love that. Taking up the fact that the event wasn't an alumni fundraiser strikes kind of close out.
That's so good.
Very much.
Yeah, she's hilarious. This is hilarious. She's so
good. I love that because I think it gets funnier as it goes along in this section too. Like because there's one other thing. I don't want to talk over everything, but there's another part where she's talking about her feeling and she's like, I'm broken. Like everything's falling apart. And there's a specific line that has that, which I cannot find. Oh yeah, the fact that I'm completely falling apart. But then there's the one which I love too, where she's like, the fact that people sometimes tell me I look tired at PTA meetings, but who wouldn't be tired at a PTA meeting? And then you just feel even more tired. The fact that I have to make my own daiquiri and nobody around here would let me drink it in peace anyway. See, pro moms. Moms get it. Moms know what it's all about. Yeah. So, anyways.
I mean, some of my favorite parts as well have been, even that where she talks about setting up a dishwasher rotation, but she can't because her daughter has basically said that she's treating her family like slaves.
Yeah. Yeah. Then it goes into like Anna Green Gables and yeah. They're slaves.
I would love to save Dan from a similar fate.
You have kids, right, Dan?
I have 3 kids, and I think that's why these parts. I got into a dishwasher rotation fight with my kids last night, so I think that's probably why that.
I've heard the slave labor thing several times.
No, it's true.
Like, clean the goddamn cat litter. Like just do one thing.
We must live in basically the same house, Chad.
Yep.
I had a conversation this morning.
I have to say, though, my absolute favorite line of this, and I don't think applies to you, Dan, but it doesn't to Brian, but the absolute favorite line is on 77 or 81 in the UK edition. The fact that maybe second marriages are always better than the first, but nobody tells you.
Oh, dear.
No, it doesn't apply to me. What do you think? What role does memory play in this book? Silence.
I'm thinking like I was waiting to see if you're going to lead beyond that, and also like if it's going to be the same answer right now as it would be later when you see how things sort of function like that. Like what? Yeah.
Everything feels so present and urgent that I've read so far.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know what I mean? I almost don't even think of it as memory. It just feels like so sudden and fresh and new, even though it might be, coming from the narrator's memory. But I don't know. There's like this gush of urgency that just keeps moving forward. There's almost like no time to kind of dwell on something or think harder on it. It's just kind of present it and move on, present it and move on. And it's just the next thing, the next thing, the next thing.
Except memory breaks through, right?
Yeah.
There's all this focus on sort of the baking of the cakes or the baking of the cinnamon buns and the children waking up and the slamming of the doors and tripping on the yellow truck and all this stuff. But then, there's this, all of a sudden she's thinking about her father and the fact that her father couldn't make beds, which leads her to thinking about her mother and how she died. And then she tries to steer away from that, right?
Yeah.
It's just that I think in a lot of discussions about this book, there's been a lot of conversations about memory, and people have had a lot to say about memory, and yet in the early pages of this section, she highlights the fact that she actually doesn't think she remembers much at all, and she certainly doesn't remember things the way other people do. That's what
I was gonna say. Actually, is the part where because she brings that up a couple times over like how Stacy makes fun of how she can't remember things and she never can, and yet like it's almost like there's different types of memory. Like there's the emotional memory or the memory of like the things with her dad or things that are like in her brain that become part of her overall worldview versus the idea of remembering a specific date, instant, thing. Like she knows her stuff from being the historian, but it seems like I can't remember where that part is. But if I felt like when she's talking about the things she doesn't remember, they're always related to like specific dates or things that you're told to remember as facts. Whereas like the memory's functioning in this section, at least, as like the things that come to mind that trigger the next cascade of ideas. So like your memory is just part of your present way of seeing the world and of dealing with the world because you've had it already built in. And so it sort of just like triggers the next like little run. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. And I think that relationship between the present and memory and the way that they sort of alternate back and forth, I mean, which things I think throughout the whole book, but you've got a good feel for in this first section. I think it's kind of fascinating how she's managed that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a slight pivot, but I'm curious with, when talking to people about this book, would you, because of the form, would you consider this experimental literature?
I think when I first read it, I would have thought it was experimental. But Lucy said something that has made me change my opinion on that. I mean, she said that it is an experiment. It's not an experiment. It's just a work of literature. It's a work of fiction.
Yeah.
And for her, experiments don't work. So it's experimental literature if it doesn't work. If it works, it's literature.
Yeah.
That's good. I like that.
That's the view she takes. And I really think that is exactly right.
No, because it's a very trivial, like to me, it's like, whatever, it's whatever kind of label you want to put so you know where to put it in a bookstore or something. But I could see with the form, like trying to get people behind it, like just read it, you'll be fine. It's
yeah. I mean, I think experimental has always been used as a way of telling people that they don't need to read it, as a way of discouraging. So like when it was at Delkey, our books would always be experimental, was an easy way to shorthand like too difficult, don't read. Like it's like don't bother. So it's like a label that's applied from like in a malicious way frequently by reviewers, rather than being like, yeah, this is experimental in the sense that like there aren't that many books that are written this way. It's not following the triangle. It doesn't have the normal like some pages of description and then dialogue and like all the ways that like all the rules that you can learn in a craft class aren't there. So it's quote unquote experimental by not being that, but it really just means that it's unique or unusual. And I feel like in the past, at least, whenever people applied the experimental label, it was a way of damning that book slowly and like not doing it directly, not being like this book sucks, but being like, oh, it's experimental.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I have the right term for the feeling I got from reading this first part of it, but I enjoyed it in a way I don't normally enjoy, just conventional literature. It reminded me of the last time I got this feeling was when I read Paget Powell's Interrogative Mood.
Oh, right.
Where it's just a question, and it's just you kind of play into this like wonderful, like the language, and then just kind of give yourself over to what the author's doing. And it's just, I kind of got that same feeling from this first section that we read that I got from Paget Powell's novel. But again, it's always one of those ones that they throw out there as, oh, this is an experimental piece of literature that only uses questions, or this is a piece of literature that's one long sentence, or like it's some kind of game or something that do you want to play or do you not want to play?
I might be wrong about this, but I believe Gilbert Sorrentino's Gold Fools, which is the same thing, came out before the Paget Powell book.
Okay.
Too. And that was like, I guess that would be a failed experiment since they don't use that one as the example of like the same technique. Sure.
Well, but I mean, to further your point as well, Chad, I think that the word experimental is, I mean, it's a terrifying word for so many people. And what's kind of amazing, I think, about this book is how easy it is to read. Yes. The Booker jury, the chair of the Booker jury had said in an interview last week that this may be, for people who are this may be the easiest book on the Booker list to actually read and enjoy. So people are worried about this whole. They're caught up on the size of it. They're caught up on the sort of the one sentence nature of it, and yet, as I keep saying, it's so damn propulsive that you find yourself a few hundred pages into it, fairly quickly. It just keeps you.
Yeah. The last single sentence book I read was the New Directions book, Laszlo.
Hard to say last name.
Yeah. And it wasn't very long. I mean, it was very short, but boy, that was hard for me. That was really hard to read. And this one, I feel like I'm in such good hands with her that, it reads so well and so easy. It's just, I'm so impressive with the command of the language and how just enjoyable it is to breeze through it while still being, fantastic and complex. I don't know. It's a little overwhelming as a writer. I'm glad I don't write like this because it'd make me just kind of want to quit. So I can keep going, luckily. But it's very, very impressive feat. You guys are really, really fortunate to get a hold of this. I'm so glad you put this into the world.
Yeah, I like
the writer she reminds me of the most is also maybe some of David Markson's work. I remember when I first read Markson having a similar sort of feel, wondering if this is sustainable, and just eventually kind of putting myself entirely in his hands, and just that sort of and this is the part where you get the sort of the free flow of words and associations and how they trigger not just awareness or ideas or new tangents in the mind of the narrator, but I mean they work that way with you as a reader as well, where she puts together these three sort of 4 or 5, the strand of alliterative phrases and words. And I don't know about you, but I found that my mind ends up sort of taking those off in an entirely different direction, and I think that's as well where one of the pleasures of reading this is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like the fact that it is basically a monologue too. There's something about to be in someone's mind like that makes this very easy to read too, that you're seeing how that works and you start to mirror not exactly her thought pattern, but there is something that comes between the two, between the page and your mind as you're reading it, that makes that work really well, I think, and makes it less like, it's not daunting in terms of reading it on the line by line basis at all. In comparison to those other books on the Booker Prize. One thing about the Booker Prize, I don't know many people know about this. I didn't know about it until recently. And it's crazy, is that, so they read all the books that are submitted. The judges read all the books that are submitted. They choose a long list. They read all of those long list books for a second time. They choose a short list, and then they read all the short list books for a third time and then choose the winner. So they will have read this 3 times before deciding it wins, because they want to know that the book has that sustaining power to go through multiple reads, rather than just being like the book that you really liked that you read last or whatever.
And I think that is probably one of the things this book has in its favor.
Me too.
This book warrants multiple reads. I got so much more through, and not just because there were 30,000 new words, but I got so much more on the second read, and start even just picking it up and reading bits of it, or reading the first sort of 80 plus pages to prepare for this again. I mean, there were sort of things that I just didn't notice the first or second time through. Yeah. So I think that my hope is that the jury will have the same sort of response, where associations that maybe they didn't catch the first time. This book, she plants things so early in the book that come out much, much later, that if you don't read it a couple times, you're not going to be entirely aware of what she's doing.
Dude, you know who else it reminds me of is The Tunnel by William Gass. Is another one that people who like Gass, and especially that book, will really like this too. It's not the Gass book is a little bit darker at times in ways, like in terms of the person's consciousness, but there is a similarity, and just like a former or someone who's a professor and has some of the academic bits too. So, but that's a little bit more Nazi tinged than America tinged, if that makes sense.
So, yeah, I mean, I haven't read that, so I can't comment on that.
Yeah. Another big giant book that would be good to do on this show, actually. But again,
no, after the Franz in New Yorker or Harper, I don't read difficult literature. It's not nice to the reader. So.
That's funny, because that's the one that, like, I've tried not to use the word experimental, but difficult I don't have any problem with. I don't know why, even though it's probably a worse word, but like if someone says it's difficult, I'm like, oh, well, that means it's going to be rewarding. Like things that are difficult are rewarding, I guess. I don't know. There's something wrong with my head.
Well, that's widely described.
Yeah. Anyway, so wrap this up. Do you have a favorite line that we haven't gone through that you want to share?
Me first?
You go first.
Okay. Well, I mean, I have several. It was very difficult to choose one. But let's see here. Hey, can someone else go first?
Yeah, Brian, you got something?
Yeah, I'll read. I mean, I've already mentioned it, but I'll actually read it on page 11, talking about little kids and their egos. It just makes me think of my daughter, because we were walking past a pond that they freeze over in the wintertime and you can ice skate on it. And my daughter's 4 and she's never gone ice skating. I'm like, this is where you can go ice skating maybe this winter. And she goes, oh, I already know how to ice skate. I'm really good at that. I was like, you've never done that in your life? She's like, no, I'm good. I'm good. I know how to do it. You don't have to show me. It's like, where do you have this like confidence? What the hell? Because mommy taught us never to be proud. The fact that some moms teach their kids the opposite nowadays, bolstering them up nonstop like little gods, telling them how great they are at practically everything. EGO. That's my daughter. I try to teach her something. No, I don't know how to do this, Dad. Like, you've never done this in your life. I can't teach you anything, and you're 3. What the hell?
There's one thing about you mentioned about memory I just came across I had underlined here is on 47. Still, just about every memory somehow takes me back to something I don't much want to think about. Fukushima, the fact that Chuck and I blah blah. So yeah, that comes up here, and now I'm going to pay more attention to that, I think.
Yeah, and I think very much it comes throughout the whole book.
Yeah.
Okay, I think the one thing we haven't talked about, and I think this is another reason why I think this book is so important, is I think that she is dealing with sort of climate crisis, environmental collapse, what we do to animals, our relationship to the natural world in a way that I haven't always seen in a lot of newer books. So I'm going to read. There's a passage on page 4, very early in the narrator section, where it goes, "Some like it hot. The fact that soon polar bears and walruses will have nowhere to go because the polar ice is melting. Cheese and pineapple on sticks, cheddar cheese logs, school bus, ground cardamom, dried cherries, zest. The fact that walruses can swim for 400 miles, sure, but not forever. For Pete's sake, the fact that animals don't pride themselves on irrationality the way we do. The fact that, according to Ben, half the mammals on the planet will disappear by 2050, 200 species a day, or something like that. The fact that Ben says everybody on Earth will soon be starving or suffocating or dying of SARS or Ebola or H5N1. The fact that H5N1 only has to mutate a few more times and we're all goners. So maybe it was all for nothing, human achievement. But before that happens, we still have to do our taxes. And Leo needs to fix the garage door. The fact that it keeps sticking, missing button, bathroom grouting. The fact that Stacy would probably approve of a global pandemic as long as it included us. For nearest and dearest, and that's where I'll stop it. But
oh man, I like that section too.
I'm glad you picked. I had that highlighted on mine as well.
Yeah,
top part of it. Yeah.
I'm having a hard time choosing, so I'm going to do 3 quick things. I love that right before that on 3, the fact that 11%, sorry, I'll put my face on here. The fact that 11% of Americans carry on driving when the fuel tank empty light comes on.
Yes.
The fact that, boy, you'd think it'd be more like 80%. I'm like, yeah. I get there, I'm like, 20 more miles, no problem.
I chuckled out loud on that.
That was, yeah. And then right below that, the fact that he says drugs work on a molecular level that can be assessed using logarithms and Schild curves, but I just pop in and leave the rest to chance. But to echo your one about the environment, the ending part of this on 81 is great, because he's talking about how these kids died because of the explosion at the chemical plant in Texas, and these girls died in their bed. So the fact that I don't know why everything doesn't stop dead until everybody gets together and sorts things out, so no little girls ever die like that in their beds again. I really don't. Nor the firefighters, but nobody fixes anything. Not faucets, not window frames, not the Ohio River. The fact that sea salt now contains microplastics. The fact that coelacanths die now from eating plastic potato chip bags at the bottom of the ocean. The fact that sometimes I think that people today must be the saddest people ever because we know we ruined everything.
That is haunting. Yes.
Yep. That's like, It's not dissimilar from the book that we're doing together in a few months. We're gonna spend a few months going through this and being depressed, and then we're gonna launch right into a whole thing about how there's no water left.
All right.
Yep, uplifting. Anyways, okay, well, I think that's all for this week. Thank you, Dan, for coming on and talking to us and giving us some background. We the next week's podcast will be on YouTube on next Wednesday, I believe. Or it'll be announced. Just subscribe to that and you'll find out when it's coming on. But we'll go up through page 150. The regular podcasts always come out on Thursday morning. You can rate and review them on iTunes, subscribe, tell your friends. Anyone who's reading this book should listen along and jump on. They can ask comments, send questions. We'll answer them or talk to them. And I think that's all. You can find us at open_letter on most social platforms. I'm Chad W. Post everywhere. Brian is Brianwood_. And Dan, tell us a little bit about where people can get Biblioasis's information.
Our website is just biblioasis.com, so they can find out what we do there. And I guess that's enough.
And you are on, Biblioasis is on all the social media platforms as well. Very easy to find. Really great employees that work there. Hopefully we'll have some more of you guys on this as things go along. So it'd be great to talk to Casey, Vanessa, everyone.
Okay. I'm sure they'd be very happy to do so. And like I said, I really appreciate you doing this, Chad.
Yeah, this is fun. This is going to be a good season, guys. Season 10 runs right up to the end of this year because we're going a little bit slower than we usually do because of the size of this. But okay, till next week, everyone, just tune in and stay angry, I guess.
Works for me.